The best way to give a campaign setting personality and flavor is to pay special attention to what the player characters might find if they just wander around randomly in unplanned locations. Never mind what you have on the main adventure, never mind what you have planned, what is just lying around here? What makes up the scenery? What's in the background? Those sorts of questions, when answered, and answered appropriately in a way which makes the player characters found that they discovered something, will really add a personality to the campaign setting that you're trying to portray. And since we are reskinning Rime of the Frostmaiden to be a Dark Sun campaign adventure, it is especially important that we portray that this is a harsh desert setting filled with all kinds of alien hostilities, where psychic powers abound, and where there is mystery in the sands. Welcome to part 4 of 8 of our series, Rime of the Dark Sun, in which we take the adventure module Rime of the Frostmaiden and reskin pieces of it so that it better fits a Dark Sun adventure. In our previous episodes, we laid out the story, and we covered some overall mechanical changes that we would implement consistently throughout all of the detailed chapters that we are talking about from this video forth. And in this video, we are going to cover Chapter 2 of Rime of the Frostmaiden, and discuss how to reskin and to reflavor various wilderness encounters, which are elaborated and described in that chapter in Rime of the Frostmaiden. Before we get to that, however, there are 6 points that I want to address about the previous video concerning the 10 towns. Number 1. In the village of Saltview, why is it that GARN the Hammer and ELZA have a bad reputation for selling subpar equipment? In fact, the answer lies in the name of their shop, Black Iron Blades. Early on, when GARN was starting out, he decided to get a leg up on his competition by calling his shop Black Iron Blades, implying, falsely, that he sold metal weapons. He didn't sell metal weapons, but when people came in looking for them, he was such a charismatic salesman that he was able to let them leave with something else instead. And so he prospered, and despite the fact that he has the best and most reliable wares in all of that village, he still has a reputation for false advertising. And I think it's fair for various NPCs to point at his shop and say, Black Iron Blades, more like Black Bone Blades. Don't be fooled by that name. Secondly, let's talk about the halflings and their beetles at the end of the Foaming Mugs quest. I realized that we had already reskinned AXEBEAKS as ENIXES, and dogs which pull dog sleds as KAHES. Polar bears have very different statistics from dogs, and so it isn't quite right to say that the polar bears, which were pulling the goblin's wagon, should be restatted as the same kinds of things as the dogs which the players ran out to pull their dog sleds. So when you say that the halflings have these giant beetles, make sure that they understand that these giant beetles are different from the ones that they can rent out, the ones that they recognize as domesticatable. These are like giant Herculean beetles, ribboned with fluorescent stripes that signal poison, and they are a size category larger than the ones that they are familiar with. Thirdly, I forgot to mention that the Yuan-Ti Broodguard, which plays a special role as Trex in A Beautiful Mine from Tyr's smithing district, is extra intelligent. Unlike other Yuan-Ti Broodguards, who are born dim-witted and assigned a servile role, Trex was born with mental ability scores that are all 13. This is why Trex left, this is why Trex sought out a future in bossing around troglodytes, and why he brought them into Tyr's largest mine. Fourth, and I should have mentioned this before, it's absolutely fine if more than one PC is unique and mysterious in the ways that I have described in the previous videos. I said before that if you have players who want to play characters that are not Athasian, say Warforged or Kobolds or whatever, you should let them and just make sure that they are unique and mysterious, that they are found as orphans, that they were found with a unique artifact, and we are going to make sure that that artifact secretly came from the lost city with which we will replace Yithrin later. And it is fine if more than one PC, or even all the PCs, have that status. Maybe they were found together. Maybe people tried to remove or steal those unique artifacts with which all of the PCs were found, but they were unable to due to some kind of supernatural force. All of that is fine. When I said unique and mysterious, I didn't mean in comparison with the other player characters in the party, I meant in comparison with other Athasians, the NPCs, the world. Next, when the PCs find the Templars' hideout in the Unseen, it's disguised as a large sandstone rock just outside of Tyr's walls. Vustro can show the players the door which leads outside of the walls from the Noble's district, and whose path, marked with tracks, will lead to that hideout. Finally, at the end of that quest, the writing on Nildar's desk is not writing to his brother, but in fact writing to the Sorcerer King Calic in Exile himself. Nildar is updating him on how their vandalism campaign goes, on why they are trying to weaken Tyr's morale, and how they are preparing the city for Khalik's arrival in the form of a dragon. Now, at the end of this 10 Towns quest, the player characters have ample evidence that there is a conspiracy of Templars to support King Khalik as he returns to attack Tyr in the form of a dragon. He's preparing to ascend from afar, and he is going to destroy the city if he succeeds. At this point, the player characters are summoned to an emergency meeting of all of the speakers of the various districts of Tyr, who beg the player characters to go out into the wastes, see if they can discover the hideout, in the same way that they discovered that other Templar's hideout. See if they can discover where King Khalik is, and bring him down before it is too late. They promise them riches, they promise them officialdom, they promise them whatever the PCs would find necessary in order to be motivated to go out there. And so that is the transition from the 10 Towns quest to Chapter 3, Sunblight in Rime of the Frostmaiden, which we will reskin and describe in the next video. In the meantime, however, we are going to take pieces of Chapter 2, which are wilderness encounters, and reskin them. These encounters are very important because we are going to use them whenever the player characters travel, whenever they go from here to there, and we need to describe what the world is like just by wandering around in it. So let's get to it. Here we have Chapter 2, Icewind Dale. Tall Tales in 10 Towns, we're going to ignore that because we already have an exciting enough narrative on our hands. The Sorcerer King is trying to return in the form of a dragon. The end of Tyr is at hand. We have much more to worry about. This section here is what we're going to be working on for this video. Take a look at this random wilderness encounters table, and take a look at this paragraph which says running wilderness encounters. Basically, when it comes to running wilderness encounters, it's simple. We roll 2 d20s. Beforehand, we designate one of those d20s as the sandstorm die, and if its roll is higher than that of the other d20, the encounter, which is decided by that d20, occurs during a sandstorm. As for the encounter directed by that other d20, we are using the random wilderness encounters table. Except for, we are not using this table, we are reskinning each and every one of its entries in a way which goes along with the stated difficulty, as well as the spirit of the encounter. So let's step away from the text of the module for a second, and just present the wilderness encounters here, and our reskin over here. So let's go through them. So we've got the d20 table, and we are going to convert every entry on it. The first entry is a Yeti, and for difficulty it says varies, and that's because you could either have 1 Yeti, 3 Yetis, or an abominable Yeti, depending on how difficult you want this encounter to be. As I mentioned last video, the easy replacement for a Yeti is a Grick. A Grick fits with the Dark Sun setting, it has a similar challenge rating, similar behavior, and it also has a souped up version. Just as the Yeti has the abominable Yeti, so does a Grick have a Grick Alpha. Secondly, Goliath Werebear. In the module, this is a kind of fun encounter where the players are trudging through the snow and they suddenly come across this giant Goliath Werebear who comes across and says, "Hey, do you need any help?" And he's all friendly, and that's kind of unexpected and fun. And there's no real challenge to it, it's just a flavoring thing where it's an unexpected bit of comedy or an upbeat in the storytelling. And we can do that here. We're going to say that Carusi is a Goliath who crashes into the party from the air. He's been working on a series of Leonardo da Vinci style wings, and he's been trying them out by climbing up on top of giant sandstone and diving down from there. And he just sort of crashes into the party and he says, "Oh, sorry, trying out these wings." And he is initially indifferent to the party, but he could be made friendly or hostile depending on how they interact with him. We're going to suppose that the charisma checks to interact with him are DC 12, again, going easy, just as the Goliath Werebear challenge was easy. Next up, instead of crag cats, we're going to suppose that there are 2 carrion crawlers. Challenge rating is equivalent. We'll just say that there's this additional fact that the crawler's eyes can be used by a smith or a craftsman, such as Garm the Hammer, to create a salve. It's a one-time use salve, and it will grant the user resistance to heat damage for a day. As for a Cold Light Walker, we're going to replace that with an Umber Hulk. We'll have an Umber Hulk burrow up out of the sand and attack the party. And instead of an Ice Troll, we have this really fun encounter, which I'm actually proud of designing. I know this goes against my general philosophy of reskin, don't rewrite, but I had to write something. We're going to say that the players come across a Roper per the monster manual, and we're going to say that its creature type is a plant, and it has tremor sense of 120 feet. It is buried 5 feet below the location from which its tentacles protrude. While buried, it has full cover, but anyone who is next to it can use an action to dig it up and make it exposed so that it doesn't have any cover. Furthermore, its false appearance trait makes its tentacles look like a vibrant green tangle of vines with red flowers. This is our reskin of the Roper as a monster, which perfectly coheres with Dark Sun mythology and Dark Sun lore about Elven Rope, a certain plant predator. Now, instead of the Frost Druid and Friends encounter, we're just going to have an oasis. A little oasis where the player characters can get some water, but there are 3 Ankhegs buried around it, and they will attack as soon as the players approach. When it comes to the Shardalen Berserkers, we are going to keep the very same stats, we're going to keep the very same kinds of things, they're human beings, but these are Templars who don't realize that Kalik lives. These are Templars who are unconnected to Kalik, and so, per their stat block, they sometimes fall into a trance in which they reach out and become lost thinking of Kalik, and at that point, they don't do anything. The Frost Giant riding a mammoth is a deadly encounter, and we are replacing it with an equally deadly encounter. We're going to have 2 Yuan-Ti abominations who are hiding behind rocks that give them 3/4 cover, and they fire a volley of warning shots at the PCs, telling them to relinquish all of their goods and walk away. These are abominations. They are very tough. Plus 3/4 cover, getting the drop on the PCs, it's not pretty. These abominations can only be dissuaded with a charisma check of 20 or greater, or, if a substantial bribe is involved, a charisma check of 15 or greater. As for how substantial a bribe is and whether it's enough, that's up to the DM. Just as in the case of the Frost Giant riding a mammoth, the case of the 2 Yuan-Ti abominations will prove deadly if it comes to blows. After that, we've got the Battlehammer Dwarves. It's an easy encounter in the original module, and for us, it's an easy encounter as well. No changes, except for that we're going to describe the dwarves as Athasian. You know, hairless and all. Now, on a roll of 10, the player characters in the module will encounter the Ancient White Dragon. It's a deadly encounter. And this is Dark Sun. I'm sorry, but I want to make it as Dark Sunny as possible. On a roll of 10, the PCs encounter Boris, the Dragon of Athas. Now this encounter is at a distance. Either the PCs see him soaring in the sky or striding on the wastes from miles away, or else, if the DM wants to make it particularly perilous, the PCs might stumble across him meditating. If to their peril, the PCs disturb or try to interact with Boris and catch his attention, he can be dissuaded from destroying them with a combination of the following, and you gotta have all of these. A charisma check of 15 or higher, a substantial bribe, and information about the recent events in Tyr, which is actually why Boris is in the region. Now, there's no way the PCs can ever hope to stand up against Boris. I would say that when you're using statistics for Boris, you should feel free to take the highest, most magically potent dragon or villain you can find from any book you own, and use that. Take an Archdevil's stats from Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. Make sure the creature is gargantuan and make that Boris. Pick Niv-Mizzet from the Guildmaster's Guide to Ravnica. I really suggest that one. But we're flexible here. Point is you pick a boss stat block against which the players cannot hope to stand. That's Boris. And if, per absurdum, the PCs have an encounter with Boris and survive it, it wouldn't be bad for Boris to make a passing remark about the uniqueness of the prehistoric artifact which one of the unique and mysterious PCs has. Nothing specific or informative, nothing he's willing to elaborate on, but just a certain kind of,
"That reminds me of the jungle from the far east."
Something like that, I don't know. On a d20 roll of 11, the PCs are going to come across an Otyug, per the monster manual. We're going to take the exact same skill check DCs, the exact same saving throw DCs, the exact same sort of encounter. We're just going to say that instead of a snowy owlbear, it's an Otyug. On a roll of 12 for wilderness encounters, we're going to keep the gnolls, no change there. On a roll of 13, we're replacing all the orcs with Thri-Kreen, 6 Thri-Kreen with all the extra weapons and psionic powers per the sidebar in their entry in the monster manual. That is what we are going to replace the orcs of the many arrow tribes with. On a roll of 14, we're going to have no changes, we're just going to keep the Goliaths. On a roll of 15, the encounter will be the same, it's just that instead of a Chwinga, we're going to have a Flumph. Same personality, same flavor of interaction, it's just a lone Flumph on Athas. Now when it comes to this Awakened Beast encounter, what it's supposed to be is a social encounter in which it seems like the player characters find an ally, like this fox or a bird that wants to join them, but it turns out that this ally is treacherous and is going to betray them at the next hostile encounter. So let's do that. Let's say that they come across a lone human who's wearing bone armor and has bone weapons, but which otherwise has the statistics of a Duergar, which is to say, a human Templar. It's a human Templar spy, is going to try to join up with the player characters, deceive them and endear himself to them, but then, as soon as they are in a hostile encounter, he will join in the hostilities and attack the PCs. On a roll of 17, instead of having Icewind Kobolds, we're going to have a bunch of Troglodytes, 2d4 Troglodytes. A DC 15 Charisma check is sufficient to avoid hostilities in this case. And on a roll of 18, the PCs will encounter Herders, a bunch of Erdlu Herders. Erdlus are like Struthiomimus, like one of these bird-hipped dinosaurs that has a big body and a narrow neck and a tiny head, and human beings out in the waste herd them. Keep the type of encounter the same, just make sure that the encounter is with a herder of a bunch of these weird ostrich dinos. The herd of beasts encounter we're going to keep the same. We'll just make sure that we describe the herds of beasts as either a herd of big ol' kenks, those beetles, maybe some IMIXES, or maybe some Mikalots, a bunch of bus-sized giant lizards, all trundling through the waste. I like that one. Make it a herd of Mikalots, a mile-long train, a traffic jam of bus-sized lizards that are all going a certain way, maybe for reproduction or migration, who knows. And finally, on a roll of 20, instead of having peritons, we're going to keep the same encounter, we'll keep the stats of the peritons, but we will make sure to describe the creatures as looking like these colossal, grotesque dragonflies with way too many eyes, which have all kinds of talons and horns, and which are trying to gore the PCs to death. They should recognize one of these dragonflies as being mounted on the wall of the Inn in Saltview and labeled Ol' Bitey. It's one of those. And those are our wilderness encounters for the Wastes of Athas. Anytime the player characters are moving about to a maximum of 4 per day, I would say that they have one of these. Now, as a fun optional rule to really make this setting feel Athasian, try this. Say that half of the damage of any attack that a creature inflicts on a player character while wandering in the wilderness is psychic damage. Don't worry about micromanaging which kind of attack from what or why. Just say that half of all of the damage from any monster that they find in the desert is psionic. The other half is whatever is listed in the stat block. This makes things a little more difficult, since after all, barbarians when they're raging do not resist psychic damage. It's a higher grade of damage, if you will. But it also communicates how hostile the desert is and how weird the monsters are. Your players will say, "What? Psychic damage? From that cactus? Really?" And you'll say, "Yes, psychic damage." And that's Dark Sun. Now, let's get on to the one location in this chapter that has a map and a description and a story and all of that, which we are going to put in our Dark Sun campaign. Here it is, the Lost Spire of the Nitharil. We are going to take this encounter and place it in the Athasian wastes, which the players can come across as they travel and explore and look for the hideout of King Kalak. This is a piece of the Lost City, which is buried amongst the jungles that the players will find later. Just as in Rime of the Frostmaiden, originally, long ago, there was a city that was floating up in the sky and it plummeted to the earth, and the spire was part of it. So it is here. And here, following the map, the idea is the same deal. Once long ago, you had this vertical spire, but now it is plummeted deep and buried in the earth, and instead of ice and snow, of course, is buried in the sand. It's broken in the same way. The chambers are broken up in the same way. In fact, I would keep almost all of this the same. Just change the simulacrum to a hologram, and make sure that the simulacrum cannot recognize anyone who comes across it, that it speaks an alien language, and that it just repeats the same thing over and over. Anyone who uses their psionic powers to comprehend languages or the equivalent will be able to discern that it's saying something about the city is falling. The city is falling. Also, I think it's very important to say that if any of your player characters, or all of them, are mysterious and unique, and they have this artifact which comes from the Lost City, this artifact will glow when they are in the spire, and it will have a faint, dim light if they come close to it from the outside. We are, of course, eliminating the connections to other bits of Chapter 2. We're eliminating the idea that the wizard who was originally in this spire went away and got burned as a witch or all of that stuff. That never happened. Whoever the original inhabitant was died thousands or millions of years ago, and all that's left is that hologram, inert. And that is our guide for Chapter 2. You'll want to have several of these wilderness encounters as your player characters go around the Athasian wastes and try to find the hideout of King Kalak. Next time, we're going to describe the hideout itself. as well as the battle with that Sorcerer King, one of two. In the meantime, don't forget to click like and subscribe if you're enjoying these videos. Thank you very much for watching them, and hit that bell icon if you want to be notified as soon as possible when I put the next video up. I'm going to try to have that up soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.